All right, thanks everyone for coming. I'm just going to see if I can successfully share my screen. All right, you should be seeing my Firefox open to the workspace for today's workshop. Just by way of introduction, I've been teaching a number of courses using cloud resources for a few years now. I went through a stretch using Azure Notebooks, a stretch using RStudio Cloud, and I'm now using Terra AnVIL's product for teaching courses. And in general, I've had good success with all of these. I'll discuss a little bit at the end some of their pros and cons and differences. But in general, the nice thing about doing this is that you provide a consistent environment to all of your students so that everyone has access to the same computing resources, and everyone is also using the same packages, the same version of R, the same everything, so that when you test something yourself and it works, it will also work for all of your students without the various errors that you end up with from people using different versions of software. So I'm going to start off here just by getting you started from a student perspective here. If as a student in one of these classes, I would point you to a link like you have here, and you would appear here and see this, and I would populate this about the workspace with something like this to help get you started as soon as you're there. And when I click or hold my mouse over the pencil here, I see I do not have permission to modify this workspace. That's because I'm doing this as another student user, just to be sure that I'm seeing exactly the same thing that you are. And I have a link here to the full workshop notes, which you also have linked from the pop-up workshop notes. And I'll go to those later. So I'm going to get us started here from the student perspective, and then go into the background on how I set all of this up. So what I'm going to hope to show you is that as a student, all of this is pretty simple. As an instructor, there's quite a bit more that I've done behind the scenes, although I'm going to try to show you a lot of different things without it being overwhelming, and also while telling you that it is possible to do a course much more simply than this, but this will provide you with a lot of options. So just to get started here, you've already done this. You've signed in with an email address. You've been added to a group behind the scenes, something that I'll talk about later, but you don't have to know anything about that as a student. All you have to do is go here. Now, actually, if you've just started in, there's going to be a little bit more text on number 3 here. This is the normal instructions that I give to my students, which is to go directly to Cloud Environment and customize. If you've been attending the other pop-up workshops, you'll know that the first step that you've been doing is to go to these 3 dots and do clone. That's optional for me here. If you clone this, you will have your own copy of the workspace. So your workspace will have its own Google bucket, and you would have the ability then to edit this workspace and also to do your own editing data or workflows or things like this. For the purposes of this, it doesn't really matter. I doubt that you would be editing this workspace. You can if you want, but the way you interact with it will be exactly the same in any case. So I'm just gonna myself go and choose the RStudio environment, this R 4.03 Bioconductor 3.12.0. I'll choose 2 CPUs, 13 gigabytes of RAM. It's fairly small persistent disk. I've already done this, so I don't need to update it. But once you click this, you'll then be able to click on the Open RStudio button. Maybe I'll do that with a command click just so that it doesn't cover up here. And then I'm not actually going to do anything in the RStudio environment here. Well, no, that's not true. I will take you here and we'll clone some course materials from GitHub.
Levi, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So it might just be a login snafu on my part, although I think I'm logged in.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to the cloud environment, it says you do not have access to run analysis on this workspace. Is that what students would see too, or am I just not logged in?
So if you have been added to the course pop-ups group, then I believe you should be able to you should have billing access during the workshop. Can anyone else tell me? Is this a common issue? This is something that maybe I don't know about because I haven't set up a course in this way before. Martin?
I think well, Barry needs to clone the workspace, so you can only launch the cloud environment inside a workspace that you own.
So the students would have to do that too, Levi, then, rather than not clone it. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, so I'll give just a little preview here of these two different approaches on the shared workspace and on the billing account. This option one on the shared workspace is the way I have set things up in the past, but what we're doing today is on the billing account. And apparently on the billing account, the student does have to clone the workspace before they can compute. Using this other option, which is the one that I've normally used, which is just sharing the workspace, then you don't go through that step. You start it just as I did. And apparently the reason I was able to do this even as my student user is because I'm still connected to a billing account.
Perfect. Thank you, Levi.
Yeah. So yeah, these instructions that you see here, where you just go directly to cloud environment, customize, and run R, that is all that's necessary if you share computing through the workspace, and the workspace becomes writable by students. For me, you'll see that I have this workshop open as a read-only workspace. That's because I have my own billing account, and I can run a notebook or a studio instance with my own persistent disk on this read-only workspace. Clean up some mess here. Oops. So this will take a little while here for you to, a couple minutes for you to be able to open RStudio like this. But once you are there, I'll go ahead and just continue ahead a little bit to show you. I'm going to do File, New Project. Version control. And I think for most basic teaching applications, this would be enough. if you were providing data through GitHub or code through GitHub, the students would all have it now. You can see that in this project, I have created a bunch of files from the source GitHub site. And I've also created a bunch of sessions which are actually empty right now. That's just because in this example, these are being controlled through what's called Git submodules, which is to say each of these, in the way I've set things up, is its own separate repository, and there's just a pointer to them on GitHub. So if I want to access those now, I have to tell students to do these two additional commands. The first to initialize the submodules, and then the second one to update. And this is something that it's going to work for all of you. And I can also tell you that when I've done this with students on their own laptops, there's a whole bunch of extra steps here because they have to install. If they haven't been using Git and GitHub before, they're going to first have to install Git. Then Git submodules might not work by default. That might have to be installed as well. And then it's going to have to be connected to RStudio by providing a path to get into RStudio potentially. And it's all platform dependent, so it's not a trivial thing to do on your own. But here it will just work. So there's the initialize. And there's the update. So now when I go into one of these, I've got another, this is one session of the course as an R package with a package down site. And if I want someone to be able to rerun the, let's say the lab for this session one, they can browse into session one vignettes and open the lab and have access to the learning objectives and exercises and code for this first lab. And that's it. So it's really, well, actually, let's do a quick show of hands. How many people have managed to get this far already? Oh, I see a couple wavings.
Actually, still struggling there, Levi. So maybe as a canary here. So I think my problem was like it took me a little while to figure out I needed to have two copies of the workspace. One was on the dashboard, and the other is RStudio in it, so that I can easily switch contexts. And
to go back and forth to be able to copy this code.
Yeah, and also I guess when I was creating the Git version control repository, there's like this grayed out box at the bottom where you're supposed to browse. Where I can see now in the instructions, browse to choose the current directory, but I didn't browse, and it kept telling me that I needed to specify a directory, but it seemed like I'd already done that. So.
Yeah.
So now I'm at the submodule init, so I should be okay now, I guess.
Yeah, I never quite learned that lesson either. As you saw, I had the same, I made this same mistake the first time as well. It seems like that would be a reasonable default, but
yeah.
So yes, maybe
I managed to follow along with you, Levi, but the purpose of the submodule init and update, rather than just when you did your git clone, like why could you not just get all the content from the repo in one shot? What's the extra purpose there? You probably said it, but I was clicking through.
No, I haven't said it yet. Let's see. I put notes about this at a point later. Where did I write that? Yeah. So you might like to use Git submodules if you like the idea of having independent R packages and GitHub repos for each of multiple course units. So that could be relevant if, especially if, let's say, one unit takes a lot of computing time, and you don't want to have to rebuild all 10 of your units every time you make a change to one of them. It turns them into standalone units with their own package down pages. So if you have a lot of dependencies, things that take vignettes that take a while to build, those are all reasons why it might be advantageous to have them as independent packages rather than one mega package. If that's not the case, then you might as well just put it all in one repo. It's simpler just to put everything in one repo. This just shows you how it's not necessary. You can have things basically look like it's all in one repository when it's not. And in fact, so it's like one repo in that it auto updates after I make a push to any of the individual session repos. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but maybe I'll go ahead and show this anyways, if I can make this a little bit bigger. So here are all of these individual session repos. When I make a push to any one of them, it updates the package down for that site. And this is all using GitHub Actions. I can tell you a little bit more about it later. But it updates the package down site for that session, and then it triggers an action on the main site. This is from a repo called template session, which I use as a template to create each new session. And you can also use it as a template if you want. And then after that action is triggered on the main site, it then updates the main package down site as well with links to the sessions. So if I've created a new session or made something, a new vignette available on that site, it will update the table of contents on the main site, and then it will also rebuild the Docker images containing these Docker images contain the Git submodules, and so the Docker images containing both all of the package dependencies from each of the submodule, because the main site has it suggests every one of the sessions using the remotes package, and then it builds a Docker image which contains all of the packages required for running any of the sessions and contains the code from all of the submodules, and then it pushes that to Docker Hub. And then I made a note that it could also push another image for direct use in Terra, although I haven't found the need to do that. And then this main site that is updated is what then the students clone in what you've just cloned into AnVIL.terra.bio, and that goes to Docker Hub. By the way, once it gets pushed to Docker Hub, it automatically gets pulled by this app that Sean Davis created, the Orchestra app, and it could also potentially become available as a custom image on Terra. Does that help answer your question about why bother with Git submodules?
Yeah, it sure does. It's a very impressive setup, and I can see why you're doing it that way, to manage it individually as each package with the package down site. But that's quite a bit of setup.
It's a lot of setup, but actually, like with using these as a template, you could set it up again much easier. I mean, I spent a lot of time just learning even how to do things like trigger an action on the main site and how to create a table of contents pointing to all of these sessions, but it's all there already. If you were to start by using as a template this main site and the template session and putting that into your own organization, it would be much faster to do the same thing.
Thanks, Levi. I'm sorry for.
No, not at all. Not at all. That please, anybody interrupt me at any time. These are supposed to be discussion-filled, informal pop-up workshops. So I'm really happy to have questions and comments.
Vince, Levi, sorry. So each of those directories, like session 1, it's a proper R package, right?
Right.
Could we just CD into it and look at the, ls or whatever?
Yep.
Right. So it's got like a description file, and then the vignettes, I guess that's where the markdown is for whatever the exercises are for that session.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so I, for each one, define the dependencies for that particular session. And yeah, I made them consistent across, so every one of the sessions has a vignettes directory with these two R Markdown files. And you can see if I go to yeah, I tried to make consistency across all of them by in this template, sort of putting an outline for how to do each one of them, so that they would look the same across all of the sessions. And I also made a little sed helper to go through and replace some of the ends with an actual session number.
I see. So for a session, you make a clone. You copy process that template session into session n, and then add it as a module.
That's right. Yeah. If I were signed in here, I can. Well, I'm not signed in on Firefox, but there would be another button here that I took a screenshot of that says use this template. And I just wanted to highlight that use this template is very different from forking the repository, and that use this template makes it yours. It's not a fork. So it means that you can have your own issues, that it's no longer connected to an upstream repository. But yeah, this is how I did it for each session. I would start by use this template. Then it would ask me which organization to put it under and what to call it, and I would change it from template session to session 1. I would go ahead and use this template, create the new repository, then I would clone the repository, run my sed helper, and then go through and add all of the materials for that session, so that it would eventually look like this. But most of this, other than the actual content in here, is just boilerplate from the template.
Levi, if I may ask, why would you have all these sessions within this main GitHub repo instead of having separate GitHub repos?
Well, these are separate GitHub repos. Each of these, like if I go to
But you use this submodule thing, right?
Right.
So I know that this must be advantageous, but I'm just wondering what is the exact advantage of having this submodule setup and all this coordinated in such a nice way, instead of just copying and pasting.
The main reason I did the submodules is so that you can do what you just did here and have all of the sessions together in one place, in this, like, as subdirectories of this main repo, and so that it would also appear that way in the Docker images.
Okay.
I suppose I could have done this in the Docker images and here as well, just with some code in here to do a bunch of Git clones, just to, without actually linking them. But I don't know. I like Git submodules because at any time, if at some point in the future I've pushed changes to any of these, I just do Git submodule update and all of them will update.
I see.
Like, it's meant exactly for this purpose of having repos that just appear like a subdirectory within a parent repository.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, and maybe I'll just point out here in this main one. So as I mentioned, I made all of these sessions suggests and defined them all in remotes, and then that's the only thing that I need to do to get all of the the packages installed on GitHub or on Docker, or if I wanted to do it here, actually there's I'd have to take a look at the GitHub action, but the easiest way to do this locally is to use DevTools has an install deps function that would then actually install all of these packages and their dependencies. I could show you that. It only would take a moment. Well, I'll just open this up here under this build YAML. Right, so I don't actually have any, this is a biostat course that doesn't use any bioconductors, so I didn't actually, for this purpose, use BioC Manager or the BioC mirror. I do have another example of this that sets the repos so that you can install bioconductor packages. One good example of this is, just because it comes to mind first, is John Davis's Build a BioC workshop. I've remembered that URL right. Yes. The installed deps, there it is. This is what I could use to do the same thing, including bioconductor packages. So maybe I'll, just for something to do, I'll go ahead and do this. This will probably take a while because it's going to install all of the dependencies for the entire course.
So maybe Levi, while that's ticking over, like from your students' perspective, when they're working on this and working in AnVIL, then they go through your material, and then what's the kind of products that they submit, or the kind of, and how
Right.
they do that, and
So for the products that they submit, they I have them create R Markdown files. I have them. Now I'm not going to be able to knit anything for a while, but I have them submit those things outside of this whole environment. I have a course website on Canvas, and they hand in their assignments there. So they produce an HTML file and an R Markdown file, and it happened already. And I have them submit them. I don't use the workspace or anything like that for having, or GitHub for having them submit things. I have on some past courses had them submit assignments as a on their own GitHub repository, or by pushing to a shared one. But I don't know, for bigger classes like this where I have, I mean, for this course in the fall, I'm going to have around 60 students. It's just much easier for me doing all of the grading within the Canvas environment. It's built for grading. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear from especially any of the other current Terra users whether you could see a use case for actually using this environment to have students hand things in. I mean, it could be done, I think, through through the AnVIL package and GSUtil CP.
well, there's the GitHub Classroom framework, but obviously you've got the Canvas and the learning management system all set up to chunk through it. Why make your life more complicated? But I was wondering, with the organizations and the stuff, they could work collaboratively and do all those sorts of things. Submit.
Yeah, I haven't tried, honestly. I haven't tried the Google Classroom. I don't know if it could make my life easier or not. I kind of doubt it, but that's the particular kind of
GitHub
course that I teach, or GitHub Classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also sort of my situation of I'm teaching biostatistics to a bunch of students for whom, like, they don't have previous experience in GitHub, and it's not really my course to teach them. So I'm kind of trying to minimize teaching them extra things that are outside the course's learning objectives. Oh,
Yeah,
what happened?
makes sense.
Okay, so it looks like everything is installed now, which means that I should now be able to just load any of these sessions. I don't know, let's try session 6, vignettes, session lecture, and knit, and any of them should just knit. I'll be surprised if it doesn't, because I now have all of the dependencies for all of them. Except now I've run into a PDF LaTeX error. This is something that doesn't happen on the GitHub action. I'm not actually sure why I would need PDF LaTeX here. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, that was because I was trying to produce a PDF document, which I don't need. And the reason that I have that there is because back on the course main site, I have this table of materials with Git sites and a bunch of links, including a YouTube video. But for the lecture, I provide both HTML and PDF. Just because, I don't know, it seems some students like to have something that, I mean, with the PDF, you can actually either print it or make notes on it using your PDF editor. And this is all produced again as part of the GitHub action, so I'm not doing this separately. So when I make a change to one of these sessions, this PDF will get updated automatically once it works through the system. One thing just to note that I've had some issues with is when you knit something on Terra, you need to use your files menu to actually download it. So if this were my assignment and I want to submit it, I'm going to have to click these two things and choose export, more export. And that gives me my, well, since I've chosen two files, it'll make a zip of both of those files and then download them for me. But just to say there's a little bit more involved in downloading files from the cloud, but it's still reasonably easy.
You say a few words about how you set up the course within AnVIL?
Yes. So since time is flying here, let's actually talk a little bit about how I set up the course on AnVIL. All right. So the first thing I did was create a group. And this is where you keep track of who the students in the class are. So to create this group, you need the email addresses that your students are using to sign into anvil.terra.bio. And that was the reason for your registration in this course and having to provide your Gmail or G Suite address so that you could be added to the Bioconductor pop-ups group. So you create a group, you can name it after your class, name it something other than Bioconductor pop-ups. There's some detailed directions here. And then after you've created a group, you create a workspace. And then you have a couple of options for how to share with your students. This is the one that I use. I don't know, I just found there's a little bit fewer steps and it keeps everyone on the same shared workspace. And under this option, you click on those same top three right-hand buttons that you've used to clone, except that for something that I own, I have an option called Share, and it allows me to share the workspace with this group. And then I make you a writer and allow you to compute, and then you can both write to this workspace and compute on it. So I don't know, that might have some disadvantages, but I haven't really found them yet. The advantage is that everyone is always looking at the same workspace as I have. So if I make some updates to those instructions on the workspace, or if I were using the data features to provide data, everyone would always be on the same workspace. And they're able to compute on it without creating a clone. The second option, which is the one that the pop-up workshops have been doing and what has been done today, is to add that group on a billing account, which will allow students to create new workspaces or also, as far as I know, do anything else on this billing account within the Terra interface. And then the students work off clones of the workspace, not the same workspace itself.
Levi, can we just pause just briefly there? And I wonder if maybe there's an expert from Terra on the line, but it seems like in the first case, it means that everyone can edit, like that dashboard document. Someone could accidentally or intentionally just modify it. And so I guess that sharing implies amount of trust between people.
Yes.
And they could, accidentally modify one of the data sets that you carefully posted. Presumably you'd have some other way of, restoring it, but still. And on the other hand, like you said, option 2, things can drift apart. They clone the workspace, but after cloning, then they're on their own. So kind of set it up perfectly the right way. I guess number one also, because most of the work is being done in RStudio, it doesn't really interact with the Jupyter notebooks. But I think if they were using the Jupyter notebooks, you could collaborate as a group on creating a notebook that everyone shared. But you couldn't have, if one person changed the notebook, then everyone would see that change. And again, that might be what you were expecting, I guess.
Are the Jupyter notebooks actually in the workspace drive as opposed to the user's persistent drive or persistent?
Yeah, I think there's an attempt to synchronize them. So yes, if it's auto saved back to the Google bucket. I was just wondering whether there's someone who knew better than me on.
Yeah, nothing like that happens in RStudio, so I haven't come across it or.
But also, there's just a couple of things about the billing account, since this is coming up now, and I'm not sure that it'll come up elsewhere. Like you guys are on our billing account, and we start it and stop it, shortly before and shortly after each workshop. Because even though we've been restricted to doing computations that we've only done computations that you've been instructed to do, you actually have a kind of a carte blanche to do whatever you want. So again, there's kind of a trust that the people who have the billing account aren't going to abuse it. And especially in a larger course, that becomes, abuse in both it could be an accidental abuse, but somehow having the billing account is something that you want to somehow manage very carefully or be aware of the risks of.
Yeah, I put a note here just saying one student willingly running up costs could necessitate shutting down the free offering, and I don't currently know how to identify that student. If this were to happen, I would only know how to cut everyone off. Sort of like a shutting off the main water source for a building where one person has left the tap running. I wish I did know how to actually identify who was responsible for running up excessive costs. It's never happened to me yet, but it could. Maybe I'll go through a little. I'll skip. We talked quite a bit about the GitHub already. I'll just make a note here about making commits to GitHub from AnVIL Terra. You can do it with the SSH approach, or the HTTPS approach, and I'm not really sure which is better, even though locally I always use SSH because it's more convenient. But on Terra, I'm not really sure which is more convenient. So I just note that if you're using SSH, you have to create a new key pair on your persistent disk. And I guess this is one where if this were something being backed up into the shared workspace, I make a note here that you really should use a passphrase for your key pair if you're using it remotely, and that would be especially important if it were somehow getting backed up to the shared workspace. I noted that it would always be possible to accidentally share it to the shared workspace. So I just recommend using a passphrase. And then with the HTTPS approach, to do it safely, you need to create a token on GitHub, and this will give you basically a one-time password that it will only show you once, and you use it as a password when you do a push once per session from Terra. This took me a while to figure out. But it works. It's pretty easy to create a new token. And the nice thing about this is that it makes it easy to revoke access again at any time. If for some reason you thought there was a security breach there, you can just go and revoke one of these tokens on GitHub. So, and a little bit about billing, there are a couple of options. The first option, direct from Google, is the one, it's the easiest and the one that you've seen instructions on how to do at first. So this is easiest, but it does require a credit card, and it is a direct post-pay setup. So you run up expenses for a month and then you pay it with your credit card. Option 2 is what I have been using now for a while, for close to a year now, which is to use a reseller. There are a few of them, but they provide some, and it's some work to get set up, but it provides some distinct advantages. The only disadvantage that I think is that it requires some work. You have to set up an agreement between your institution and the reseller if your institution doesn't already have it. But advantages, there's no additional cost over direct billing. It costs the same, unless you're using Strides, in which case it costs less. You can pay by invoice instead of credit card. That is, it can be both prepaid or postpaid, but you have your grants office pay the invoice and you never use a credit card. There's an extra layer of protection against overspending. You can set budgets with your reseller and they will help to identify you or to revoke accounts if they're getting overspent. And they do provide some additional budgeting and cost visualization tools. And this is just an example from one of my dashboards for an account on Onyx on spend, showing my cumulative spend over the month of May and how I can create budgets and go between resources and things. It's just a little bit easier to use for me than the Google GCP dashboard. And my impression from working with them is that these academic collaborations are a fairly small part of their business, but were valued anyways for some reason. And I've gotten a lot of individualized customer support from them with advice on how to set things up, with training, with anything that I've asked. So I'm a big fan. I'm the one, I had to set up Onyx as a vendor for CUNY, which involved a security review and a legal review of the contract. There was actually negotiations between CUNY and Onyx in order to find something that the CUNY lawyers were willing to sign. It took several months, but it eventually did happen. I noticed this link here at Dana-Farber, which seems to me like a great example of how the process can be streamlined for investigators at an institution that already has an account. So Dana-Farber apparently already has an account with Onyx and with the Strides initiative, and they just have a couple of forms for an investigator to fill out where you let them know which grant you're going to be using, and they will set you up with a billing account there. And then finally, just a note about Strides. It's a program at NIH to provide training and discounts for commercial cloud computing. In order to use it, you have to go through one of these commercial resellers. Onyx is one of them. There are a couple others listed on the Strides website. There's this Carasoft for Google and 4Points for Amazon Web Services. So you have to have an arrangement between your institution and one of these institutions. But once you have that, you get approximately 25% for most of the discount for most of the spending that you would be doing, as long as the account is connected to an NIH grant. And other than that, it works exactly the same. So for me to use Strides after I already had an account at Onyx, or if you're setting it up at first, there's no difference other than that every billing account has to be connected to an NIH grant, and then you get these discounts, which I've pasted in. This is the most recent listing that I got. So for most of the things like compute, storage, and network egress, it's a 25% discount. All right, and we have a few minutes. I thought I would mention some alternatives to Anvil Terra with some pros and cons according to me, which are open for debate and correction. I might be wrong on some of these things. These are based on my limited experience on all of these. So RStudio Cloud offers a service. In my opinion, it's simpler. It's definitely more R-focused, and it seems to have a more polished and mature interface. But on the other hand, it's way more expensive to use than Terra. It's also less scalable and doesn't have any special access to NIH data or discounts. I don't know, the more expensive, yeah, it's based on like hours used by the students. So it is possible to have it be inexpensive if your students aren't using it very much, but it's easy to use up all of the compute. As long as you have students using small instances for not too many hours, then it can be inexpensive. But if you had any kind of serious usage, it would be much more expensive than what I just showed you. Microsoft Azure has a service called Databricks, and I've used Microsoft Azure notebooks before Databricks. I haven't actually used it since this. But my impression based on my previous usage and reading their documentation on this is that it provides a simple integration between workspace and notebooks using what they call their Databricks file system, which I think my understanding is makes these cloud buckets look like a file system. And another pro is it is expected to be joining AnVIL Terra soon. I don't know if the interface there to RStudio will look anything like what it does through the native Microsoft Azure platform, but it might, I don't know. Cons, I think the main one is there's less experience right now in our community, and I think it would be harder to find other people who have used it. I haven't used it for a few years ago. I will just say when I used it a few years ago, I liked it. I can't even remember why I stopped using it. I think it was because at the time they had a free option, which went away. But back then it was great. I was able to provide compute to my whole class for free. There's another service called Renku, which is free and non-commercial. It's run by the Swiss Data Science Center. It makes it simple to use any Docker Hub image, and it will be free for the foreseeable future. And I think these are significant advantages. It does have some cons, though. There's no persistent disk, so preserving any file between sessions requires committing to a GitLab project, which is good for reproducible analysis, but may have a learning curve. And the available free resources are somewhat limited. Although in my discussions with the creators before, it sounded like you can request additional resources for specific purposes. And you can also set up your own Renku on any Kubernetes cluster. Then there's Sean Davis's creation, app.orchestra.cancerdataSci.org. It's free, runs on Google, but currently funded by NCI. It runs any service from any image on Docker Hub by request from Sean Davis with no additional setup. So that's a real advantage. You provide a Docker image, you give Sean Davis a link, and if he agrees, then it's there, and that's all there is to it. Some cons, though: there's no persistent disk, so anything that you install or add will be lost after 8 hours, and the available free resources are limited. You can, of course, run your own RStudio server. I'll let you figure out what the pros and cons of that are. And you can also use your students' own computers, which, yes, it shifts off the problem, but in my experience causes a lot of other problems, which do end up being my problem at one point or another. So that's all I have. There's a lot of stuff in here I didn't really have a chance to go through, but it's there for you to take a look at and to use. And please feel free to let me know if you try it and have issues. You can post issues on any of these GitHub repositories or just reach out to me.
Great, Levi. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Levi. Then I have a quick question on the fly. Have you ever, in comparing Terra to other tools, have you ever used Colab? You know Colab?
I don't know it. Yeah, I'm sure I should have said there's probably a number of other things that I don't even know of. What is Colab?
This project from Google Research. I only seen once in a seminar. I was wondering. I think it's only targeted for Python, so it's a little limited in functionality. Okay, if you only use it, never mind. Thank you anyway.
No, sorry. I have seen a few other ones which I just have never really followed up as much. I think I saw one that was also targeting RStudio that actually allowed like shared live editing, something like a Google Doc on our programs, which looked kind of cool. I can't remember what it was though.
Okay, thanks, Levi. That's great. The notes and video will be posted today or tomorrow. No meeting next week. Next pop-up workshop in 2 weeks. And see you all then. Thanks for attending. Thanks, Levi.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.